Very cool.
Wonderful. I just want to welcome everybody. I wasn't sure how this was going to work out, if we would all be able to see each other and hear each other. And so far, I'm quite impressed with what we've been able to organize and the number of people who are able to be here today. We're well over, with the UNT crowd, I imagine we're well over 20 people together today to talk about cultural selection analysis. And so this is pretty great from my perspective. And we're fortunate to have some various folks who have agreed to present in the next couple of meetings to see how this is going to go. And Fabio is the first of that, and so I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to let him go ahead and go. I think it might be advantageous, though, if we all mute our microphones, just to ensure that we don't have a whole lot of background noise that might interfere. And then kind of jot down your questions, I guess, as we go, or type them in the chat, and then we'll have an hour or so to discuss afterward. Does that sound okay with everyone? Great. I'll take head nods as agreement. So wonderful. Okay, we'll move forward.
Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. I would say I'm sorry because my English is not so good. So when I put the presentation to share with you, the screen, I won't see everybody. So if someone have some question, you can stop me and make your question. And the second thing is when I put the presentation, I cannot see my notes. So it's the first time that I will present something without my support notes. Sorry for that. So let's do it. First, I'll just see how to take this thing off. I guess I can't. Everybody is seeing the presentation right now. Someone needs to say me in audio because I can't see you now.
No, we don't see it.
Let's
see.
Let me see.
I can't see yet. But early, I could see.
Really?
Yeah, same.
I don't know if you.
I can't see either on your face.
Okay, it says.
I don't know how to do this.
It says
because I share the.
To view.
Let me see.
So in the menu on the right, the very top menu is screen sharing. There we go.
Yes, we can see now.
Okay. So, but I guess when I take off, and now, because to me it's different right now.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that.
Oh, that's okay.
So today I'm going to present my some research. There is a finger type, fat finger type here. Sorry, conducted on LAPEX. LAPEX in Brazil say Laboratório de Psicologia Experimental. It's kind of experimental psychology laboratory from the UniRV. It's a university when I work. Oh gosh. Okay, so I took a position here in 2009, and the principal subject that we are working so far is cultural selection. I work with only undergraduate students. This is my team. Everybody's an undergraduate student from psychology course.
Fabio, when you're advancing your slides, we're not seeing the advancing of the slides. So I think you're on your third slide and we're still on your first.
Wow. Let me see something.
The slides are not in full screen.
It's working right now.
The first slide we see, yes.
Well, when it's changed for you?
No.
Oh gosh. How can I manage
Now we see.
this?
Now I see the second.
Okay.
Now it changed.
Because I guess there is a delay.
A delay.
happening.
Okay.
So I will try again, and then when you see the second slide, you can let me know, please. It's not working.
There we go.
That's the second one?
Yes.
Yes, we can see the second.
Just so I know, you can see the third right now?
Correct.
Oh, that's okay. So this is my team. Everybody is an undergraduate student, except for Leslie, the girl after a fat boy. She is a professor here too. I got my master thesis in 2008, sorry, in Universidade de Brasília. Laércia Vasconcelos was my advisor, and we just published the paper about it in 2015 and called Effects of Concurrent Cultural Effects of Concurrent Cultural Open Cultures. We, at this time, in 2008, there is no procedure to investigate meta-contingents. The only procedure was developed by Christian Vick. So where we were trying to develop a way to investigate meta-contingents at the laboratory. So we used paper from Baia in 2004, sorry. And he used anagram tasks, but in Brazil, we don't have standard study about how to manage anagrams, so we couldn't know about the difficult to make words with that letter. So we decided to change to airplanes papers. So what you did was, there was a condition A. People work in a triad as a microculture, and there were two papers on the desk. One was blue and the other was orange. They need change one of these papers. If one paper was blue, they need to do together 4 paper airplanes, and then they received 25 cents, and there was a timeout for 30 seconds. If they choose the orange one, they need to do the 4 paper airplanes, cents, and there is no timeout. So the decision was not made by each participant, but the whole group. So in this condition A, the optimal choice was the blue one, because to do the 4 paper airplanes, they need about 30 seconds. So in the end of the session, that takes kind of 15 minutes, they receive more money to divide between them if they choose the blue one. And the condition B, there was a red one paper and a yellow one. If they choose the red one, they need to do the same for paper airplanes, and they received 10 seconds, and there was a timeout for 108 seconds. And if they choose the yellow one, they do this destructor task and receive 5 cents and no timeout. So in this condition, the optimal choose was the yellow one. So as I said, at this time, we didn't know how to, I'm sorry, someone is with microphone on.
Sorry, it's my microphone.
No, don't worry. And in this situation, at this time, we do not know how to manage this thing. So we were trying to create the procedures to investigate, and we thought that this task, distractor task, was important, but it's not more important now. We have tasks that you can investigate meta contingents without distractions. So here we have the results for each group. It's important to say that in that experiment, and someone that will show after, we did replacement for participants to create a culture. So after one session, 15 minutes on I'm sorry. Someone the microphone of someone is on, and we can hear the World Cup, soccer World Cup,
Yeah.
happening in the back. I'm sorry.
It is an important cultural
Okay.
event.
He's my neighbor. Yes.
Can you mute your microphone on the menu on the right? There's a green microphone button. If you push it, it will mute.
Tem painel de controle, Ti. Tu dá para desligar o microfone. Tu já desligou? Tá ok.
That's okay. Can you see the slide yet? Yes. Vocês estão vendo os slides?
Yes, we can see them.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry. So we have the results for the group 1, and as I was told talking, after one session, 15 minutes on condition A and 15 minutes on condition B, we replace one participant, the oldest one, and the first generation, we changed the participant was more close to the camera that was recording the sessions. So as you can see, if we plot the optimal choice. So how much close to the number 1, more the optimist was the choice from the group, and the group in 1 did this so well, and the group 2, it was working until the 8th generation, when a guy entered on the experiment and thought that everything in there was something to test himself, and the other participants was I forgot the name. I'm sorry, but when the experimenters played as a participant, and decide to pay to have more choose and the other card, in this case the orange card, And then, so he made agreement with the participants saying, if I can choose, you can have my money at the end of the experiment. Because of that, the line dropped. And after two sessions, he realized that it's not about him, it's about group. So he decided to choose the optimal with his friends. So it was my master thesis. And then I came to here. And when I was on my board with Professor Todorov, he asked me if the money, because it's just a few coins, could really control these tools from the participants of the group. And we decided to do an experiment to verify that. So we did this experiment. It's kind of the same procedure, but there is no money at the end of the sessions. People just choose the cards, do the airplanes, and then wait the timeout and do a new choose. So when you do that, the choose stay near of the 15%, the case line, as we can see in these results. So with that, we try to answer the Todorov question, and I guess we were very good in this answer. So the money was the responsible to control the tools in the previous study. So after that, in my doctoral course, Laércio still was my advisor. We decided to change to use the MetaTool software. This software was developed by Thomas from São Paulo, PUC from São Paulo. So in this software and this procedure, participant has this screen. I have this screen. So each quadrant belongs to one participant. As you can see in this screen, there is three that are red, green, red, and blue. The computer showed some numbers. As you can see, I put showed numbers. And there is a place below, and participants can insert these numbers. Two operand contingents, when the all sums between the showed numbers and inserted number was odd, participant received points. So this is operand contingents. So the response was composed, or the operand, sorry, was composed by 4 response. So to meta contingents, the computer compare the sum of the numbers inserted by participants. So if you look to the green quadrant, you see the participant had put 1, 2, 1, 1, and after that, you can see the number 5, so it's the sum of the inserted numbers. So we can schedule if the order between this the sum of the inserted numbers. For example, here we always use the participant on quadrant green need have lower sum of the quadrant head and lower than quadrant blue. So the participant one, as we call, need has this number lower than participant 2 and lower than participant 3. So the meta contingents was measured by this aggregate product, and if it happened, cultural concept was released. So here I put a slide about the operand contingents. And then the stood for my doctoral dissertation. We published at 2015. we try to see if different types of cultural consequence, this difference is God for yourself or God for others. So God for yourself was money. People receive money through yourself at the end of the experiment. Or God for others, that donation they could do to poor people in the city. So we want to see if this different types of consequence could control differently the selection of culturants. One thing important, at this time, we work with just 2 participants. So it is important because in this procedure, if you use just 2, there is a high probability they met the criteria to receive money, cultural consequence in this case. So we plot here the results for the good for yourself. The first one on the left is called Grupo Bem para Si. And 8 generations. At this time, we still work with the replacements. And we see that people learn the operant contingents. And after the generation 4, we can see in the first group that the bold line, that the culturants start to happen more frequently. To the group good for others, it took more time. It started just in the generation 5, but it happened. The cultural selection has worked as well. And then in generation 7 and 8, we start to do extinction phase. So we decide to start just for the individual consequence to generation 7, and then to reinforcements and cultural consequence as well in generation 8. As you can see, actually it doesn't work very well, because in the generation 8 you still can see high frequency from culturants, but in the end of the sessions, kind of the third session, we can see that it changed a little bit for the group good for yourselves, and kind of the same result for the group good for others, but we can see better results in the group good for yourself. So with that, we ask, what is happening? It's just because there is a consequence to still respond in operants, so and culturants, so they still doing the same thing. There is no a lot of contact with the extinction phase, because it's just 1 generation at this case. So we decide to investigate that after, but before that, yeah, this is here. So we decide to investigate that in this study that we publish at the same year. So here we change something. We use a triad, because, as I said, if you use just 2 people, there is a high problem to reach the criteria to receive cultural consequence. So in the condition A, people could produce points as an individual consequence, and in condition B, they could produce points and cultural consequence as bonus. So as you can see, the circles are about operant performance, and squares is about cultural performance. When there is no consequence in the first condition A for culturant, it happens at almost 40% of the sessions. And then when put the individual consequence and cultural consequence, it starts to happen above 9% and 90%, and the last 3 sessions, 5, 6, and 7. When we back to condition A, there is no cultural consequence on there. The cultural frequency drop And when you're back to, I'm sorry, when we back to the condition B, the cultural back to happen again above 90%. So actually, what we think was the procedure that used in the previous study was the problem. There is no time to people contact the extinction, and the number of participants has influence. This is the same result, but just to group two, the triad two, it's the same result. So we thought that this way to work is better with three people, and use different criteria to say that stability criteria was reached. So now I work at this way here. People in the condition, people need to produce above 9% of the consequence by 2 sessions to we say that there is a stability on performance. So another study, it is not published yet. It was submitted, but it's not published yet. It's about 2 types of meta-contingents. Actually, in the beginning, we were trying to see if there is difference, if there is individual consequence or not. But when we were doing the experiment, Marcelo, Glenn, and others published this paper. So we decided write the article as we were trying to see if there was different as a meta-contingence type 1 when you have individual consequence for the response and cultural consequence for the culturant, and the meta-contingence 2 when you have just cultural consequence that select the culturant, but there is no individual consequence to response. So here we have the results. In the condition A is just meta-contingence type 1, again, with reinforcement and cultural consequence. As we can see, to triad 1 start with a high performance on operant. This is something that happens all the times. People learn the operant contingent, the operant so quickly, but sometimes the culturant need more time if you use the method to sorter. It's not necessarily something about the learning of culturants and operants. Maybe just because the way that people learn on the task. So after the 8th session, we see that performance start to be more above 18%. But something that I want to highlight in this result is the operant drop when culturants start to increase in the session 6 and 7. It's something that I'm wondering, and I would like to, with Marcelo in the future, is the interaction between operants and culturants, because the results from I studied from Marcelo and Thais shows something like that when the culturant start to be on, there is a change in the operant. So in the condition B is only cultural consequence, so you can see the operant has dropped. And we're back to condition A, and the results was kind of the same. The operant and culturant happened beyond 9%. And when you back to condition B, the operant has dropped again. It happened to the 2 trials. So actually, this result suggests that when you have cultural consequence and operant consequence, you could select the both. But you have just cultural consequence, the operant drop, because it's kind of extinction. So it's kind of a way to think about if you want to do something applied, maybe just put cultural consequence cannot change the operant performance for the participants. So it's something to see in the future. And here, the last two presentations that I did on ABA is about reducing cultural frequency. All the previous study has worked just with something like reinforcement. So the cultural concept was always increase points or bonus or money for people. So we try to see if it's possible to reduce the cultural frequency. And I'm sorry. So there was a condition A with the meta contingents was characterized by add 45 bonus, and the condition B, the same criteria, but the meta contingents was characterized to take off 45 bonus. Here we have the results. As you can see, something important, I'm sorry, I forgot to say, is the operant contingents was kind of like reinforcement, positive reinforcement all the time. So we do not change the operant contingents, just the meta contingents. So as you can see here, the culturant, when they receive more money, happen beyond it's near for 30 trials, the maximum trials by session. And then when we put the meta contingents when they lose 45 bonus, they stop to the engage to the culturants. So it's kind of near from zero. And we back to condition A, and then they back to do the culturants performance again because they receive money. So we're back to condition B, and again the culturant frequency has dropped. So it showed that aversive consequence as lose bonus could decrease the culturant frequency. And something interesting is the operant contingents seems not be disturbed by the aversive consequence. So in this case, we do not have the interaction between operants and culturants. This is the result from contingent to trial 2. It's the same thing. And then the last work that we did here was the different effects of punishment and extinction to reduce culturants frequency. In this case, we try to see if there is difference when we schedule aversive consequence to culturant and when we just suspend the meta contingents, if it's like extinction and cultural level, if these produce different results. So there was a condition A when they receive 45 bonus, so the bonus were added. And condition B, they lost the 45 bonus as the previous study. In the condition C, we suspend the meta contingent, so there is no bonus. So in condition A, again, we see that in this case, the operant and culturant start to increase after 2 sessions and stabilize in the third and fourth session. Then, and condition B, that we use the aversive consequence, you can see that culturant frequency has dropped so quickly. We're back to condition A, so again, it increase, and then we back to condition B, and again, the cultural frequency has dropped so quickly. Then we do the condition A, and then the condition C. As you can see in condition C, the drop was slowly. So it's kind of extinction effect. And at this case, again, we can see that when we suspend the cultural consequence, there is a change in the operant performance, something that didn't happen when we use the aversive consequence to reduce culturant frequency. So we're back to condition A, and then the condition C again. And again, the drop was slowly. And in some points in the session 4, you can see that there is a kind of a disturb on operant performance for 2 participants. Here we have the results from the triad 2. We use the AC-AB design just to see if there was an order effect of exposition from conditions. And as you can see, the results are kind of the same. Just in condition C, you see changes in operant performance when you use the negative, the punishment, the lost bonus. There is no difference between the performance in operants. So because of that, we now want to investigate the filter directions, investigate the interaction between operant and culturant. I want to do my postdoctoral course with Marcelo in next year in USP. And so we will start in the next semester, try to do a good baseline to operants to show the possible interaction with culturants. And after that, we can investigate better about this situation of extinction and punishment. If is really there is interaction just when we use the extinction. To that, we're gonna use the free culturant software from Marcelo, because as you can notice, this software developed by Thomas use tentatives, and it's not a free operant situation. So with the free culturant, we can see this better. So that was we did from the 2009 so far. So thank you. It was that.
Thank
So
you.
now you can.
Yeah, now I think we can all talk and ask questions.
That was a great presentation, Fabio. Thank you.
I'm going to keep my microphone muted until I ask a question, because there was like a really big echo when we all just said that.
So, can we start?
Yes, start.
Fabio, already saw lots, many of your papers and a lot the work you do. There are 2 things that I was thinking here while I was seeing the presentation again. First of all, and that's actually something that I would like to hear the other groups. It's clear that the fact that the extinction, the culturants go down slowly is very consistent with extinction in general. But on one of your first research that you present, you showed us right now, they didn't go away at all, right? And it also looks like that's something fairly consistent in the research that in culturants, it's really hard to put an extinction in the cultural practice. At least that's my interpretation. That because the operant keeps going, people keep do this, do this, do this. So it's harder. But you said something about there was a problem that you think that it was they were not contacting the extinction. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? And the other groups, if they what they found with the extinction, if it's similar to what Fabio showed or not. If the others could say a little bit about that, I would like to hear that.
Well, first of all, in that study, one thing that happened was when they put numbers and it didn't make points, there was a highlight in the inserted numbers. It's kind of saying, hey, the problem is here. And the meta contingents, there was this highlight too, but there is no sound. There is sound in the operand contingent. So it's the first thing that we did here was get away the sounds from the consequence. The second thing, we looked to the procedure and the way that we schedule, because the first person to use this procedure was João Mariano from PUC, and we did like he did. And there was 2 people, and we schedule if the number was for the participant was lower than participant 2, and if the sum was the same, they receive money. So when we did the math about the situation, it's kind of 40% of chance they get bonus to reach the criteria. So one way to solve this is put more one participant, because that we start to work with trials. Other thing, I guess, that could influence that result was the time that have contact, because we always at this time use the replacements, and after one session we put a new participant, and people don't have time enough to see that there is no consequence, and so you change, and the new ones start to do something to see if we could get bonus. It's kind of a challenge for them. The old participant usually says something, hey, we receive money if you do this away, but it's not working anymore. And they start to do other ways. But when they did that, there is this possibility to get bonus in a different way. In this study, we tried to see if there was an increasement to different aggregate products. So the other, until the generation 6, that there was consequence, they usually put participant 1 lower than participant 2. In the extinction phase, they start to do participant 1 and participant 2 the same sum. So it shows like oh, we're gonna try to do something different to get bonus. So you decide to use the different criteria. People need to guarantee that they have contact. We decide that we measure first was the frequency of culturants without cultural consequence, and we wait until the culturants drop at the same level for 2 sessions, or at minimum the same quantity of sessions they need to attempt the stability criteria on the previous phase, previous condition. So, for example, the last study, I'm sorry, not the last. They studied about 2 types of meta contingents. The tried one needs 12 sessions. So they have 12 sessions when the bonus was suspended to produce the same frequency. If not, so we move forward. So wait until the culturants really dropped. So it's something. And another thing I ask you, and people we use the screen as kind of discriminative stimulus. When there was consequence, the color for the background was blue. When the meta-contingency was suspended, was gray. And when the last bonus was black. So there is something that say, hey, it's a different condition, and that condition you will have this situation. It's something that we discussed with Marcelo and Angelo a long time ago. So after the feedback, we decided to put the different colors in the background, and it has worked very good.
Just a quick follow-up question. I saw that Rita typed in the chat. She was curious how the new generation was introduced to the group, if they received any information or training from the researcher, from the group, or if they were told nothing when they were introduced.
Well, during the replacement, we didn't do any instruction for the participant, the new participant. The group has instructed the new participant, and let me introduce it. Well, we just, the computer said about the finish as end, and someone need to get out. So this someone was the oldest one. It was informed in the first session for the first trials, and someone get out, and the other enter in the lab, and you say, so this is your friends. He gonna work with you on this experiment, and we get out from the room, and people usually try to start to instruction this new one. Actually, we record in the beginning, we record all the sessions, but now we are not doing that because we are not interested in the verbal behavior right now, but we have the records about that. We heard, and people start saying, hey, you just need to put one number below or above the number that computer shows you. So this way you're gonna have points, and you need to do in a way that the second have the possibility to put numbers to have the sum lower or higher than you. There.
Rita says thank you. Fabio, I'm not sure if you can see the chat record or not from where you are, so I'm reading anything that I see that comes through the chat.
Thank you.
The other thing that I was wanting to ask is about when you try to control for, I think it was the third experiment or something like that, that we're trying to see the selection of some culturants when there was individual consequences and when there was not individual consequences. My question is, did you control for verbal behavior or something else in that experiment? Because that's something that we always talk about here, is that we try to look at what's happening on individual levels. So that's why we try to have very clear what is the operant response. But if you take that out, you still can have on the IBCs, people talking to each other and reversing and punching and things like that, each other's behavior. Did you control for that, or during that experiment, or how did you do that?
No, we didn't. We just recorded the audio from them. Now we heard the audio, and especially in that experiment, we heard people saying about the background color, It's kind of, hey, you see, it's black now, so maybe we need to change our behaviors. And one participant had told something like, hey, we do not need worry about the numbers we put because there is no points available because we are in the black screen right now. So just put the participant one, just put 111, the 222, and the 30 333, and they did that. So we did not control this, but we have the video, the audio. The audio, we can see that it had influence. One thing I would like to say, it's because in this, I know you, I asked you know as well because we talked about that a long time ago. It's very hard to do the analysis from the verbal behavior on these situations because there is a lot of things happening. People sometimes start to do something and start to talk about other things, and so we have difficult to put when the verbal episodes start, when they end, what's going on the screen. So I guess to do that, it's why we are not deal with the situation right now. We need better equipments like cameras on the screen, microphones in each participant, and this way we can look what is happening in the screen right now. So is that I guess it's very hard to do this job right now. So we decide to see something more basic. It's just the consequence, and after move forward for these complex situations. So, but we have studies about that from Diego, from Angelo, and people. Daniel has a part of that in his dissertation too. We can see that if people cannot talk, it's more difficult to see the cultural performance happen quickly, but it happens. So we decide, okay, it's very important, but it's not what we are chasing right now.
Yeah. Here we have pretty much the same problem. We also talked about that. I don't know. I don't remember right now when Daniele's in April paper, the one out in 2012, if the people could only talk through the chat. I know there are some software that has a chat that could help to control that without all the equipment, but I don't remember if they tried that. One of the reasons I was asking that is that one of the things that we want to do here, that at least we're talking about doing, would involve the control of the control or the analysis of the rules that people give each other, but we are not quite know how to work that out. You know, how to try to control. We'll try to elaborate a little bit more on that for the next meeting. That it will be our lab presenting, but the idea is how different rules could help or get in the way of cultural selection. Something like that we have to elaborate a lot better right now. But that part, I think it's relevant, especially when you think that verbal behavior is part of the IBCs. So how do we check that part that is not appearing on our choosing numbers or choosing lines or choosing X and Y and so on. It's like we are looking at just part of the IBC, not the whole thing. So, but I completely agree with you. That's really, really difficult, and we need to understand some basic parts before we can understand the rest. But that's something that we are trying to figure out here.
Tara has written on the chat that maybe you could control for verbal behavior without hindering culturant performance by providing individuals with a drop-down menu of a limited set of messages between individuals.
Yeah, it's possible. But one thing that I don't know where I'm sorry, I don't know how people from Pará, Aécio, are manage that. It's about people follow the rules, because here we use the people usually at the same desk, and we didn't not stay inside the room to not influence the performance. And I guess Brazilian people, I don't know in the rest of the world, but Brazilian people, we start to talk during the sessions. And it's important because have a low cost to do this, that typing. The people, your partner is on your side. While you are typing, to say, hey, stop, don't do that. Put lower numbers.
But
Okay.
a way without that was to use a wooden panel to separate visual contact among participants, and they could talk to one another using the chat window, and that was recorded. So theoretically, you could go back and look at accurate descriptions of contingencies, and you could describe those as contingencies specifying stimuli that are or not acquiring a function for other players and stuff like that. It's doable, but it's always a lot of work. I mean, we're talking about sessions that are like 4 hours long, and it's always been difficult to decide how to code an accurate tact because verbal behavior is based on function and not structure. So I think it's a very important thing to do, but I'm not sure anyone has addressed it yet.
Has anyone attempted to use Mechner's notation system to try to code some of the verbal behavior?
Yeah, for a long time in our lab, Bobby was trying to do that, and we were learning it to some extent, but it didn't really go anywhere.
Okay.
Tracy, what's the name again of what you asked? What is the system?
It's Francis Mechner's notation system. I'll type the name. I'm not fluent in it, but it's always been on my list of things to become fluent in. But then I get distracted and need to learn other languages. But I just didn't know about its utility here. So it'd be interesting to talk to Bobby a little bit more too about how that experience was. Because Daniela, you're right. When it comes to trying to like code a particular verbal operant, I've tried to do that, and it's really just kind of frustrating, particularly from a written transcript of something. The video would be interesting and advantageous to have, but it's still difficult to figure out what your unit of analysis is going to be and to keep that consistent throughout in terms of the size of the verbal operant, which should be determined by function, but then it's hard to figure out what the function is and where the start and stop points are.
But if someone wants to jump in that, I think Tara's idea is actually fairly simple, because you can even not use a set of rules. You could use just some kind of emoticon. And how do you say this in English?
Like a drop-down box of options. Yeah, I mean, you could keep it as simple as do that again or don't do that again. You could keep it as simple as do that again or don't do that again as the two options.
Yeah, that could be a simple way to try to analyze that. I'm not sure if that's something for the software.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be a good idea to try to simplify the options, but you would still have the issue of structure versus function.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that options are limited, it does not mean that you are having always the same function when the same choice is made, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Daniele. I would have to say that that's actually an empirical question. We would have to check because
Mm-hmm.
what would happen.
One thing we could do, this would be a lot of work, but one way to go about it would be to take some of the chat records or recordings that a lot of y'all have from the raw data. Tara's typing that there's probably a lot of raw data in the recordings, and I know that to be true from talking to Danielle in April. But would be to go through and come up with some common categories of responses, perhaps based on assumed function, and then see about including one or more options of those in a drop-down box. So it'd still be a lot of work, and I'm not sure that the payoff would be worth it. There might be a better way, I guess.
One thing that I have think it's about the task. The task need be something that has low probability to people discover alone, because this way the verbal behavior becomes more important. People from the evolutionary cultural biology use the tasks that so no one can solve alone. So if you have this task, we can put the participant first in kind of a baseline to see if he can do the task alone. So if not, we put them in the experiment, and he need the verbal behavior for others that has already know how to do the task to instruct to him, and we can see this thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think is important.
Yeah, or even to give an arbitrary set of symbols to see what sort of functions they assume through the evolution of the cultures.
I think it's really important to differentiate between, I mean, depending on what kind of question you're wanting to ask with coding verbal behavior, to differentiate between interlocks that might be selected versus interlocks that might be sort of dynamically establishing an interlock that's been continual.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Fabio, your comment about if the task was very difficult and they would need verbal behavior to figure it out, at that point you're talking about interlocks that help to establish a repetitive pattern, a coordinated pattern. They themselves would not be the repetitive coordinated pattern because they would only happen until that pattern was established. So, it's not, there's potentially multiple units to look at there. When you're talking about the units that are themselves repeated, even when in your presentation, even when the individual operants were gone, it didn't mean that individual operants were gone. And that even would have been the case if there was no verbal behavior, because your meta-contingency is designed not just to be a meta-contingency, but also to be a terminal reinforcer for all individuals. So that right there is an individual contingency. And then in addition to that, the individual behavior that could be of one individual that, say, picks an appropriate number based off of a number that he sees someone else pick, and then that could be a potential reinforcer for the first person's pick. There's interlocks other than, obviously there's interlocks and reinforcers embedded even without verbal behavior and without the individual program contingency. And there's terminal reinforcers that the meta contingency is serving as without individual contingency. So I think it's important to, when diving into a verbal behavior analysis, to know what really is the question that you're asking, and what units are you looking at, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I think it bridges along something that Bryant just typed about whether or not he says there's a potentially a low probability of success as EO for producing the aggregate product, and I'm not sure to which part of the conversation that referred, because it came in a few minutes ago. And then he asks if the studies in cultural analysis are an analog of the MO. And so I think those two comments map along each other nicely, which also kind of potentially brings us to the notion of thinking about terminology and how these analogs are going. I know it's something that I've talked to a few different folks about, where we talk about extinction in the context of the cultural consequences, but do we want to keep the same terminology that we've been working with operant selection as we apply to, cultural consequence extinction, or, motivating operations in the context of a cultural consequence? I don't know. I think those are interesting questions still to address as we're talking through some of these points and writing them up.
Well, I guess that as April was talking, depends of what were we investigating, because something that happened in the meta-contingence studies was, in the beginning, we pursued different topics at the same time about the transmission of behaviors, selection of culturants. So this thing about the low probability of success as IO is kind of important when people usually work. Just a moment. Here. Sorry. People that investigate about the cumulative knowledge use this thing as something important. So it's about transmission from knowledge, transmission of behavior, and I guess it would work this way. But it's different what we are doing in Brazil right now. I just know that André Saconato did something like that because he spent a little time with Baum and people in California. So he did something like that. But here we are just looking, what happens in cultural selection, and look the consequence. Someone with look to the verbal behavior, but we still don't do this type of thing because it's more complex that we have at the literature right now. But it's something important, something very interesting, especially in applied settings.
Some additional dialogue through the chat also about oh, sure. So yeah, there's a couple. I'll let you guys don't have to type. You can ask your own questions too. So I'm happy to read them, but feel free to say them out loud. I'm just not sure that everyone's seeing the screen for the chat.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, excellent. Okay. Fabio, this is some wonderful research, and I'm glad we were here to be able to see you talk about it. And you raise a topic that we're particularly interested in, which is in the competition between operant contingencies and cultural contingencies in the same context. And something an idea that we've been kind of tossing around a little bit, but we haven't thought this through at all. So I'm just sharing with y'all something that we've thought of recently. It's just the notion of different levels of selection competing with each other. And if some levels of selection might be subordinate to others, and if that's something that we're new to the field, so we weren't sure. I haven't seen this discussed in the cultural analysis literature yet, but I'm not familiar with all the literature, so I was just wondering if this is an idea that folks have been talking about, and if it's of much interest, because I'm just thinking from an applied perspective. You actually made this point earlier, Fabio, that perhaps there will be some empirical support for the idea that interventions may have maybe more, let's see, or warranted or appropriate or effective at the cultural level when you don't either have access to operant, when you don't have control over operant contingencies in might be considered a microculture. Anyways, I'm rambling a little bit, so I'll just turn it over to y'all if that's something y'all have thought about, and also if someone has already written about this competition between levels of selection in the literature, I would love any references so we can go learn about that. So, okay, I'll mute my microphone here.
That started to me with Todorov because the talk we had. Todorov sometimes tried to convince me about why meta-contingence was necessary, and I'm just doing the lawyer of the view with him. And one time he said in an event, the importance of the concept was we can maybe change the behavior for a lot of people without manage the operant contingents. And I said, yes, I agree with that, but we need to have these empirical dates that is to describe if it's really possible. And actually, it's just the beginning. We have some dates with Marcelo Bevenuti, because he job with Thais Nogara. He see that when you have a baseline and put the meta contingents after, you change the operant behavior. And when you withdraw the meta contingents, the operands never back to the same pattern that was before the meta contingents. Actually, they still produce reinforcement, but in a temporal different way. So it's something that when I read this article, there is a pilot study published in English. After the meeting, I will share with you this file. And in Portuguese, there is a lot of works that you can see some suggestion of that, but it's not the object, the aim of the studies. See if it happens. So I'm interested with that because after, if I saw that there is this interaction, I want to see in a choice situation a competition between operants and coterants in a parametric study. It's about my postdoctoral project. So I guess it's very important because to us, it started with Mataini, that Mark Mataini sometimes told about, hey, it need to have a apply situation that it is important. And he talked about school, as everybody knows. And I thought, well, we need to see if it really happened. If I put a cultural consequence, it's not a guarantee that behavior will modify because there is this consequence, because there are a lot of things happening in the applied setting. There is social reinforcement. There is social reinforcement in our studies, and I mean ours, I asked you, people from São Paulo, because participants usually say, yeah, isso aí, yes, that's the right way to do. It's not just the instructions, but we don't measure this. So in the applied setting, it could be important. If you have a group that it's important go against the law, but consequence to follow the law is not something that will change their behaviors. So I guess it's very important to study this situation.
Most of the work that we are doing in Max right now deals with some kind of competition. I'm not sure if they would answer what you were thinking, Brian, but I think almost all the research that we are doing right now involves high reinforcement for the person, a choice between high reinforcement for the person and problems for the culture, and lower reinforcement for the person and good for the culture. Because we see that concurrence between individual and cultural level, one of the main causes of many social problems like pollution, traffic, and so on. We dealt with that mostly in experimental way. I don't think that we have any published work in theoretical settings. No, I'm pretty sure we don't have it applied because that's not what we are. We have very little applied work right now, but it's something that it's interesting to look at. And I'm not sure if Tara is still with us, that she could talk a little bit about good behavior game, where that's putting a cultural consequence and look at how that works with the students. And that's something that has a very lot more applied vibe to it, more deals more directly, and it can be conceptualized as differences between cultural and individual level. I'm not sure if anyone knows some kind of paper that's already doing that kind of conceptualizing with good behavior game, but that's more applied. If you're interested in the experimental part, probably we'll be sending some papers before next meeting that could work. I'm not sure if it's going to be addressing directly what you're asking, but maybe it can at least put fuel in the discussion.
Just another thing, when we try to see the different type of consequence, good for yourself, good for others, we see that extinction work better in the good for yourself. So it's something interesting because people start to change his behavior when they lost things for yourself than the others. So I guess it's another thing that we can start to think, to investigate this hierarchy. I can't pronounce this word, but because people are sensitive to consequence, group are not. So we can expect that people is more sensitive to suspension from consequence than the behavior in groups. So it's something important, I guess.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Some of that, and thank you everyone for your responses to that question. And some of that also brings up another topic that we've thought about, that we're kind of wondering if this is also something being talked about, is analog methods for conducting assessments of cultural problems. So for example, if one's going to develop some type of intervention, based on a meta contingency, let's say in a school or a school district or something like that, what kind of assessment would be done to characterize the problem and define the meta contingency, and even to manage or assess risk? Because there may, I imagine some type of, I really couldn't tell you in a concrete way, but I imagine an attempted intervention, cultural intervention based on a meta contingency could have negative, unwanted effects on individual behavior. And so I don't know, just wondering that's another thing that folks have given much thought to, or if that's way much farther, 10, 15, 20 years or something in the field, developing the equivalent of a some kind of functional behavior assessment to get applied studies started. I don't know. It's probably way far off.
I don't know that we have 15 or 20 years to wait. But I would say that a couple of places to look at that that I'm aware of is Behavior and Social Issues has, a number of papers, but in terms of an actual functional analysis in the sense of experimentally manipulating any sorts of consequences in an applied setting, I'm not aware of. But Bigland's paper in 2005 or 2006 about conducting matrix analyses has been useful, and there have been a number of projects and papers that have been taking that approach to thinking about what the individual operant level consequences, cultural consequences, interactions between dynamic systems might be. There's a paper a couple of years ago from Ingen's group about tagging behavior in Brazil that's a nice example of that. And then, of course, a matrix project that the BFSR SIG has been working through. And then there have also been some examples of like ecological and ethological analyses that have been conducted through interview and transcribing that information that Camila might be able to talk a little bit more about too.
Yeah, and I remember one day Camila has told me about the Gehring proposal to how to analyze these things. Maybe Camila can talk a little bit to us.
We can't hear you yet.
But like that, I talking about the Gehring proposal. What kind of proposal specific, Fábio, you're talking about?
In a BPMC, we are talking how to do the analysis from the school situation that Sonia Mello and I was working at that time. And you told, hey, if you look to Gehring perspective, he have a paper, you can see how to do this assessment, how to define things, and it's a good proposal to see in applying settings a way to work, because at this time we were kind of lost with the data we have about scholarships in schools. Did you remember that?
Yes, a little bit. And Bernard talking, he don't have a very, in my opinion, very systematic method, but he talk all the time that we need to go to the place and talk with people to know about how people behave in this place, and when this kind of behavior and verbal behavior happen again and again and again, you can find something about this microcultural. And he talking a lot about a different kind of groups. For example, in the close community, the verbal behavior is very different from groups from Occidental culture Occidental people, and because in close community and don't have a secret, and people know all things about everybody. And he has some books about this, that he talk different kinds of verbal behavior in this kind of groups. I don't know. I can check maybe someone paper for choose with both of him, and now he are writing a paper to talk about methods to understand better the group behavior. He don't put in he don't send yet to a journal, but he sent for us to read before, and maybe we can see more systematically how he work with groups, for example. But he doesn't. He don't agree with meta contingents. He think that don't resolve all. Don't make his solution from to understand big groups, and because he talk a lot that we need find context variables, variables,
Mm-hmm.
and for example, between a lot of generations in the real world is not the same when we see the generation in the lab, and he have a lot of thoughts. I don't know.
Yeah. We are just talking here. Jan was remind us about some ways to make the assessments that we see at OBM to work with organizations. So things like behavior system analysis, and maybe that could be a place where we could develop a more systematic way for assessment. Then, of course, in that sense, you have behavior system analysis and the products of organizational change by Maria Malott. It's a really great place to think about organizations. And as you see the organization, maybe you could apply to other groups. That's another good place to work. I don't think there is any very hard protocol yet to make that kind of assessment.
Very hard. Sorry, guys. What do you talk?
There is not a very systematic way to do that kind of assessment yet. Most of the time, like Camila presented some work on last think tank that deals with applied settings, and we are kind of like, okay, where's the IBC, where's the aggregate product? That's kind of like what we are doing right now. At least here, it's pretty much what we do. Not yet very clear protocol yet. Yes.
Yeah, and I like the what Brian has told us, because there is a pitfall in a way. We are defining the culturants that is about the aggregate product. We measure the culturants just looking to aggregate product, and if you do that, as Dr. Brian has told us, it's possible you can lose some behaviors, important things that happen there, because the aggregate product is happening, but maybe someone has changed his behavior. You cannot see if you just look to this. It's something that I really like. Thank you.
I also would like to say something about, I feel like what Corinne says about there not being meta contingencies in a lot of relevant social scenarios is probably true. I think I hear this a lot with the concept of meta contingency. There seems to be misunderstanding that every cultural thing or every group-based phenomenon of interest has to be a meta contingency or has to be solved by meta contingency, and that's not necessarily the case. A lot of our social problems really are largely macro contingency-based problems, And an applied approach to problems might involve manipulating macro contingencies just as much as meta contingency, creating a meta contingency where there was none, or even just manipulating cultural behavioral lineages. And a lot of the educational approaches that people take to social change are often just creating cultural behavioral lineages where people can transmit something through a culture and hopefully have it supported through individual contingencies in order to make it into a macro contingency. So a lot of those approaches to applied scenarios are perfectly valid, even if they have nothing to do with meta contingency. So I just want to say that because it just seems like sometimes the meta contingency is so central in a way that it maybe we don't intend it to be, especially to people like Durin on the outside who are looking at this analysis as a meta contingency analysis instead of as a cultural analysis, which is larger.
I think those are all wonderful points, and the discussion across the the types of research and the types of questions that we're asking is really exciting to think about, because there's still so much work that needs to be done at multiple different, I don't want to say levels of analysis necessarily, but yes, there's that. But then also in terms of the types of questions, what are the mechanisms that are important to look at? What are the combinations of variables, and what settings can we translate or understand one piece into another? Are there more questions or comments from folks? What about any of the students at UNC for Danielle? I can't see them, so I can't prompt them to ask questions.
They're here, I promise.
I believe you that they're there.
I think they are looking like these ones here that say something very
soft,
very low voice, and point of view.
There was some chat about establishing operations a little bit earlier that we might want to come back to also. I don't know.
We had a student here that wanted to talk.
Oh, great.
Go for it.
This is Carlos. Can everyone hear me?
A little bit closer to the mic, Carlos.
This is Carlos. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just I was reading a paper yesterday, Crispin 2016, and it's going off of kind of what April was talking about, how a lot of the literature does talk about the meta contingency as if it were in every culture. And I was just thinking of maybe there were some kind of I guess experiments or something that we can work on to kind of make a point out there for the people that are just coming into the literature, so we can make it a little bit more clear on how you can differentiate meta contingencies from macro contingencies, and how April was saying how maybe sometimes you do have to create the meta contingency in order to create cultural change. But it was just something I was thinking about as I was reading yesterday, and going off of what April just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think about with respect to differentiating them, because oftentimes I'm teaching them, is to, and I haven't done this yet, but would be to come up with a close set of examples and non-examples of each. And so even looking at some social phenomena, cultural phenomena, and talking about similar almost to a matrix analysis, where you would talk about situations in which there may be a meta contingency in place where behavior might be explained by other operant level contingencies, or when you may be looking at a macro contingency. And so to provide a plethora of examples and non-examples of each of the concepts that would help to make them more clear. It would be in a sense kind of a tutorial on in some ways.
Yeah, or even having an experiment in which you start with a baseline of multiple individual images of a macro contingency, and then you introduce a meta contingency and see how some cumulative effects change because of that, and then you go back to a macro contingency baseline think it would be interesting. And I like the idea that Carlos said that it would be also um, a good way to get people to understand what they are, going beyond the theoretical papers that we have
Hmm.
so far.
I'll put out a shameless plug that if anybody is working on either of those, it would be really great contributions to a special issue in Perspectives on Behavior Science that a call for papers is going to be coming out on soon for cultural selection and behavioral systems analysis.
When that's scheduled to happen, Tracy?
The call for papers should be out within the next couple of weeks, and we'll want papers submitted by February 2019, and the special issue would be scheduled for December of 2019.
Everybody here, get ready.
I'll be sending an email out as soon as a call for papers is approved by Perspectives. I'll be sending that out to everybody. So the reminder will be there, but this is just an early prompt to get started.
Yeah, it would be great to have some of the papers by Fabio and Diego that we saw last week. There was just so much good stuff in there that needs to be published in English for everyone to see, and that will, potentially it could change the field, and this special issue seems to be a great occasion to do that.
Yeah, I like a lot the idea. Congratulations.
Well, if everyone's okay, we can thank Fabio and give him a round of applause internationally for being for being brave enough to be the first one to present in what I hope is going to become a monthly tradition for all of us. I will follow up with some thoughts for the next meeting when Aisio and his group will be presenting, and to ask for feedback on what's worked and what hasn't worked for everyone in the meeting today, to try and see what we can do better for the next one. Terrace typing, rock on. Fabio. So a little social reinforcement there. And so I will be doing that. And of course, if you guys have any questions or anything for me, I'm kind of serving as the organizer here, I guess, a little bit right now. Feel free to reach out to me directly.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Any other closing comments or thoughts?
Oh, yeah, sorry. We really like the opportunity to be talking to all of you at the same time. I think it's something that we should keep doing because it keeps up with speed with a lot faster of what everybody's doing. And we can find some places that some work that's similar or touching at some points, and especially, at least that's what I always think about, finding the same difficulties that we are, and doing like this is a good idea to figure out how to solve these problems, how to address some of the issues that we are having, and I think that works a lot better than just waiting for the next paper. So I really hope that we can keep doing that, and look forward to the next one. Of course, I'm really worried because that next one will be us on the spot. So you can, people are already starting to worry about how they're going to present in English. But that's a good training for them too here. So we hope to see you all very soon on the next meeting. especially to see everyone that did not get their cameras working. It's easier to follow up. So thank you very much for the opportunity to everyone. And Brian, it was very nice to meet you guys. Hope to see you with this group more times.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you all as well. This was a lot of fun and looking forward to next month.
I just typed my email in the chat because I just realized that some of the folks who were invited by other folks may not have my email. So, and I'll be collecting yours from y'all too.
Well, I would like to say thank you. You all were very kind with me. Sorry for my English. And for the students from ISU, don't worry, people are very kind here. As you can see, even your English is not so good, people make it happen. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Are you in Norway or in Brazil now?
Sorry?
Are you in Norway or Brazil?
I am in Brazil.
And besides we are in Brazil, we are very far from one each other.
Yeah.
Actually,
Thank you, Tracy.
here are
And
the
Fabio.
in the south, Fabio in the middle of the country, Chile's always northeast, right? So
Like two different countries. It's very far.
So we're covering all latitudes in Brazil. That's great.
Yeah, Daniele, I guess ISU is near of you than near of me right now.
probably, I'm probably closer to Dallas than I am. I'm sure I'm closer to Dallas than I am from Camila in Paraná. That's
Yeah.
to get to Dallas than to get to Londrina.
Good.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
You too.
All right.
Bye. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Fabio.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Hi, Tracy and Daniele. Thank you.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.